Hello, welcome to the latest edition of Global Perspectives. I'm Sanjay Pulipaka. Today we have with us Dr. Roberto Forin. He works on migration and related issues. He is the Deputy Director of Mixed Migration Center in Geneva. He has extensive work experience in Africa, Latin America, and even Middle East. He has been associated with some leading institutions, academic institutions in Europe, and he has extensive publication record on migration and related matters into Europe. Today, we are going to discuss with him about the migration from Pakistan into Europe, and of course, other related issues as well. To take the conversation forward, I'm joined by Mr. Paras Ratna, who is a doctoral candidate at National University of Singapore. Please note the views expressed here are those of the speakers, and they do not reflect the views of the institutions and organizations with which the speakers may be affiliated. Before we start off, Roberto, how did you get interested in migration and related domains? It would be wonderful if you could give this background so that our viewers will understand your research and practice journey in terms of studying migration.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the interesting questions. So, my background is actually a bit mixed. I started my career in the humanitarian sector, and I work for the International Organization for Migration and the International Committee of the Red Cross for almost 15 years in various regions in Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, mostly. And then I started becoming more interested in migration, also as a way to sort of put together my experience in some region of the world that are unfortunately origin of some part of mixed migration movement, mostly conflict, and sort of the aspect linked to the integration of refugees and migrants in country of destination. And then I took actually a mid-career master in the UK, in Oxford, on migration, and since then I've been focusing on increasing on migration more on the research side of things, and that's what took me to the Mixed Migration Center, where I can put together my previous experience in the field and my interest and now experience in research on migration.
Wonderful. In the recent years, there has been considerable uptick in the discussions pertaining to migration, both regular and irregular, into Europe and other developed countries. Is it because there has been a genuine increase in the number of people moving into these developed countries, or has it a lot to do with the emergence of social media and related anxieties that stem from how the migration is being perceived?
Yeah. So there are a number of elements that I think need to be taken into account. So generally speaking, as we know, migration is a phenomenon that remained fairly stable over the last decades and more, to around 4%, 5%. So here we are speaking about recorded migration, so mostly regular migration, and we are speaking about people who basically live outside their country of birth. So it can be said that overall, it's not that mobility as a pattern, if you like, the global south or the global north compared to the past. You know, in the past we had a lot of Italian and Irish going to the US, as we know. Today we have more predominant migration, some anxiety probably, because it's a different trend and more visible. When it comes to why it has become a problem, because I think it's fair to say that today is is perceived as a major issue, migration, as we can see in how the migration issue has been treated and discussed, for instance, in the election that took place this year. We know this year is the year of the election. Half of the planet went to the election. Of course, the US is an important example, but also India and others. So migration, I'm actually not fully aware of how much it was discussed in India. I guess that is less the case than the US. But so long story short, migration is very often very central to a political debate, a societal debate. Why so? Also, there is, you mentioned the emergence of social media. I think that emergence of social media is a tool that can play a role, but I think that at the origin we need to look at why so. Why so that that discussion on migration happened in social media. I think it's fair to say that for some a populist party, migration is definitely a very important ammunition in their campaign, which is often based on anxiety, on fear, and then that migration is in a way weaponized for the purpose of achieving their political objective quite effectively, as you can also see from the result of election in Europe, the last being the success of the AfD party in Germany with a campaign based on politics. So then the third element I would like to add is that our society are changing. Yeah, they're becoming more multicultural in Europe, and this creates anxiety in some. The others, the different, is not always necessarily welcome. It's not necessarily always understood, and so there is, I think, also a certain anxiety that is then, as I said, weaponized, but by certain parties. But I think that it would be unfair to attribute this anxiety purely to propaganda. I think there is something in our society that deserves to be looked into, linked to the fear of the others, which wanting to remain sort of in the area of public policy is probably also the originated in poor integration, in a certain part of the society being increasingly vulnerabilized, including local population, citizens, that then they're easy to convince toward the existence of an scapegoat for the problem that exists. But I would say that it's a very complex phenomenon that cannot be single-handedly attributed to one specific element.
So, what, according to you, is the scale of irregular migration into Europe from Pakistan, and what are the challenges in calculating the flows of such irregular migration? Because if that you have experienced, you could
Yeah.
let us know.
Yeah, so I was looking at the figures just before the interview to update myself a bit, and then also referring to the article that we wrote last year. I think was in June, something like that. So actually, even the movement of Pakistani toward Italy as per record, and I'm referring to Italy because Italy remained the main entry point for Pakistani. We should also actually look at Greece, which I haven't done. But so it remained actually quite stable and to a 5%. But of course, here we are looking at the registered number. So the number registered at disembarkation point in Italy and at the border with Slovenia in the north of Italy. And there we see that the number are just more or less 8,000 recorded entry per year, which represent a 5% of the total, quite stable. Even in 23, when we wrote the article, there been an uptick. And so that uptick that we saw toward the mid-year seems to indicate that the total number of Pakistani to enter in Italy was meant to increase compared to 22. But if you look at the data now for the full year, it remains also quite stable. Now, of course, we're speaking about registered number, and then particularly in the context of arrival of people from Southeast Asia, including Pakistani, I don't think that we can necessarily rely on official number, because we're speaking about irregular entry, and then we are speaking of irregular entry by sea from Turkey and potentially Greece toward Italy, and then also by land, and a lot of those got undetected.
No.
Having said that, I don't think that that if the number are not necessarily reliable, it's not that million of people can can enter a country regularly detected. So in general term, I think we are still speaking about very limited and manageable number. And here we're speaking only about irregular migration, because of course there is also regular migration channel that exist between Europe and Pakistan.
Okay. So you refer to data in your article that suggests that irregular migrants seems to be entering more through Italy than through Greece. Why do you think that is happening, that they enter more through Italy than compared to Greece?
Sorry, say again.
So you refer to in your article that irregular Pakistani migrants seem to be entering Europe more through Italy than through Greece. So why do you think that is
Sorry.
happening?
This was for last year, but I think it's probably still valid. As you know, if you're following the discussion and policy development in the area of irregular migration toward Europe, you know that there's been a focus on different entry point at different period of time. So it's very well known the interest that and the effort that Europe put back in the days in 2015 into curbing irregular entry through Turkey, Greece, and the Western Balkan, following the arrival of almost 1 million of people, mostly from Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, but also from Pakistan and Southeast Asia in general, through what is generally called the U-Turkey deal. Is well known the effort that Europe put into curbing irregular entry through Libya with the various agreement with the recognized government. And then it went on and on. And today we can count agreement with also other countries in North Africa, like Tunisia, Egypt, now Mauritania. Last year, we saw, more or less when we wrote an article, an increase of arrival through the Western Balkans by various means. Some people entering by land through Greece, and then from there, or even through Bulgaria, and then from there crossing the Western Balkan, and then entering other country in Europe, not necessarily always Italy, sometimes also Austria, Germany, and so on and so forth. So there's been an increased focus of European Union to try to curb this irregular transit through the Western Balkan and irregular entry in Europe through Greece. This led to increase border surveillance, increased cooperation with transit country, including extra-European, like Bosnia, for instance, which had back in the days some agreement for visa-free entry, whereby migrants could enter by plane to Bosnia, from there travel elsewhere. And so all this has led to increase sort of difficulty in using this route, which has led to an increased number of people considering to cross directly from Turkey to Italy. I think it's also worth to mention that as part of this increase of border surveillance and border control, we also see a spike in incident of violence at the border, with a lot of people injured, allegation of pushback, and also violent death, and people missing, as we know, particularly at the border between Turkey and Greece at Evros. This has also discouraged people.
What are the similarities and dissimilarities in your view compared to Pakistani migrants who entered through irregular channels and say migrants who entered through other regions like Middle East?
I mean, of course, we should be looking at drivers. So, you know, people coming from Syria are different from people coming from Pakistan, because currently there is still an active conflict in Syria. So there is the issue of the drivers of migration. We know that very often drivers are complex and multifaceted. So people running away from conflict are also looking for better life prospect. So they also have economic motive. And then people that come from countries that are not in conflict might still run away from violence at more personal level, domestic violence, or other kind of prosecution. So it's difficult to just label country and people coming from a specific country with a specific label, because it's very often mixed. I would tend to say, though, that if you like, movement of Pakistani toward Europe and Italy particularly has a long history. There is a very, very big Pakistani diaspora in Italy, but also in Greece. Well established, and I think quite active in a few sectors, in the sector of services, but also in the sector of agriculture. And this has established a link between those countries and Pakistani, and this has led to increased number of regular migration, but I think in certain cases also facilitated irregular journey for those who do not have access to regular pathways. I like to mention also, I think it's important, that the discussion and cooperation with a certain number of countries, particularly Middle East, particularly Asian country, is ongoing when it comes to legal pathways. As you know, Italy has recently increased the quota of irregular entry based on bilateral agreement, and most of these bilateral agreements are with Asian countries, including Pakistan, and less so with Middle East countries. So, to an extent, I would tend to say that Asia is seen as, I think there is probably a bit more welcome refugees and migrants coming from Asia compared to people coming from Middle East. I would tend to feel that there is also politics associated to that, whereby the Middle East is unfortunately more often associated to terrorism than country in Asia. Probably for a reason that we can define arbitrary.
What do you think socio and religious organizations, what role do they play in European host countries in enabling the integration of Pakistani migrants who particularly arrive through irregular means?
Yeah. So civil society definitely play a very prominent role in the integration of refugees and migrants in Europe in general. In some countries like Italy, specifically faith-based organization play quite a big role, which is linked to the role that faith-based organization play in Italy in general, particularly the Catholic Church. We know that quite a few organizations like the community of Sant'Egidio, who has played a very important role in humanitarian corridors, and also play a role in the integration. And I think that amongst those, they also work with Pakistani.
Okay. What are Pakistan's primary challenges in your understanding in effectively curbing these irregular migration flows to Europe, especially in terms of governance, state capacity, and border control measures?
That is where my expertise might be a bit limited. I'm not an expert on migration in Asia, but in general, if we had to look at general trends when it comes to mixed migration, of course there is at the origin often there is a lack of economic prospect, particularly for youth, which especially for educated youth. So we generally or very often we see that people that are migrating are not necessarily the most disempowered. Quite on the contrary, they tend to be the ones that are educated, they have some prospect. And so when the country does not offer opportunity to fulfill the legitimate aspiration, people tend to want to go and look for opportunity elsewhere. When this is not possible through legal pathways, often a regular journey are the only available option. So I would tend to think that this is probably play a role. So the lack of prospect in the country for youth and others. There must be also a level of a bit more sort of low skill. So I understand, Pakistan has also been hit by natural disaster, climate change. We know that play a role in pushing more people to look for prospect elsewhere. I think that this has definitely played a role, and it is playing a role elsewhere. Now, when it comes to the governance and border management, corruption is an issue everywhere, including in Europe. The regular crossing of border, more often than not, is facilitated by corrupted state officials. So this is a problem everywhere. And then I think that if I can be frank and honest, looking at the size, as I said earlier, of the diaspora and of the sort of movement that exists already between a country like Pakistan and Italy and Greece, for instance, from the perspective of remittances, this is a very important source of income for many families in Pakistan, as it is for many other countries. So curbing and preventing this movement, which risk also sort of stopping or decreasing the exchanges and including the remittances originating from countries like Italy and Greece and UK back to Pakistan would also be, I think, very unpopular.
Okay. How would you assess the overall collaboration between Pakistani authorities and international agencies, including Italy, in addressing irregular migration to Europe? Any specific challenges that you feel which needs to be addressed? And overall, in the hierarchy of concerns related to migration, irregular migration, where does irregular migration from Pakistan fits in Europe?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that Pakistan is often mentioned as a country with whom a number of bilateral agreements have been negotiated by European countries. So a few European country, including I know for sure Greece, but I think also a few others in Europe. For instance, they sign a return agreement whereby there is an agreement to for Pakistan to accept the return of irregular migrants, where they identify and added to the list of people that should be returned to Pakistan, which is not necessarily the case with all the country of origin of irregular migrants that are today in Europe. I think that partially as a result, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of European countries that have agreement with Pakistan along with other countries for a number of working visa to be issued to Pakistani citizens. So I would tend to say that from what I can see from outside, Pakistan has managed to develop a collaboration with a number of European countries for both return and legal pathways, which is quite significant compared to many other countries, particularly in Africa, but also in the rest of Asia. Why so? I would tend to think because, as I said, the contribution of Pakistani migrants to our society economy is so important that is considered as a strategic priority to maintain relationship with Pakistan in that sense. And I think on the other side, migration of Pakistani over Europe and elsewhere from a perspective of remittances is also seen as an important asset. And so there is a situation where both parties have strong incentives to discuss and collaborate.
While much of the conversation on migration refers to the developed world, I mean, in the recent past at least, there has been considerable conversation on what is happening to migration in Europe. What are the best practices that we can learn from, say, from developing world? I know you specialize on Europe, but I was wondering what are the best practices in responding to various forms of migration from developing world, or even for that matter for Europe, on how to deal with this challenge, which is also sometimes an opportunity.
It's not an easy question. So you see, you mentioned, if I understand what you're asking for is whether we see best practices in the developing world that could be replicated in Europe, is it? Can be
irrespective of the possibility of replicating.
Okay, yeah.
Was there a moment when you looked at something and said, aha, this is, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. But in theory, there are some very interesting example of I can mention two perhaps. Of course, the free mobility protocol of the African Union, and particularly within ECOWAS, a very interesting example. Having said that, also the European Union in itself is a very good example. So free movement at the regional level is definitely something that is always beneficial. What is more problematic is the movement across region. So there, at the moment, there are not many examples of agreement for cross-regional free mobility, particularly between global south and global north. Another example, I think, is the Cartagena agreement in Latin America. There is something that has been discussed and negotiated on the basis of the movement of Venezuelan in the region, whereby protection standard have been increased even compared to the refugee convention for the purpose of providing faster and better services to Venezuelan fleeing Venezuela. So I would say that is a good example in the area of protection, but also integration of people running away from conflict and persecution. And of course, within Europe, what we have seen recently, and that really has been a aha moment, is the response to Ukrainian displacement through the temporary protection directive, whereby to visa-free and temporary protection is a combination. So Ukraine at the same time can move freely because they don't need visa, but this was pre-existing, was already the case before the conflict. It's just been maintained. And then to the temporary protection, they basically have access to services that are almost equivalent to the services given to citizens, beside the right of vote, of course, immediately. And this we know has played a major role in a smooth integration of Ukrainian in Europe. We know that more or less 7 million Ukrainian left the country, and the vast majority are still in Europe. And this is not being discussed as an issue. You know, the first question you ask, why migration is becoming such an issue. The integration of 7 million Ukrainians never became an issue in Europe, has never been discussed as a major problem or as a threat to our society or to our economy. Why so? I think it has to do with the fear of others, which you can also call it with another name, that is racism, whereby the integration of people from the same skin color is easier than the integration of people coming from different culture. But it probably also has to do with the policy that were put in place for the integration of these people into Europe, Ukrainian. So I think that even if it's an example from the global north, not necessarily from the global south, remain an interesting one for replication as well.
If there is a youngster, what would be your advice if an youngster wants to pursue a career in the domain of migration and related issues, whether it is in the realm of research, whether it is in the realm of practice?
Yeah.
If you have to give him some suggestions, him or her, whatever,
Yeah.
some suggestions, what would that be?
I told you at the beginning my path, so to do field work. Migration, more than anything, is about people, and then to understand people, you have to spend time with people, and so doing field work, and then I think is crucially important. I think that in the area of research, is today possible to advance in the research with very limited field experience, and I think that this in the long term could lead to a limited understanding of the phenomenon that a person is supposed to be researching, and therefore my suggestion would be to start with a good amount of field work. In my case, what I found particularly beneficial is to combine field work with study. So every 10 years I do a master or something similar, because I think that, but it's linked to the same comment, gathering experience through field work and then going back to study, to academia, allow you to capitalize both, often important to put in context some concept that you are taught. At the same time, it allows you to enrich and to frame your field work through a more sort of conceptual lens. So I find the combination of field work and regular studies very very exciting and very, very healthy, if you like.
A very good suggestion on being a scholar and a practitioner at the same time, and keep moving between these two domains.
Yes.
So that you find the right balance.
Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation, and we have learned a lot from you on migration and related issues in general, and also specifically with reference to Pakistan. We have benefited immensely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
For the
Thank
conversation.
you for the conversation. It was a pleasure.